Hello, welcome to the second of two videos focused on certainty. The first video was focused on psychological certainty and belief, and the conclusion was that psychological certainty is neither a necessary nor sufficient condition for knowledge. This second video is going to focus on the other meaning of certainty, that of logical or absolute certainty. On the screen here I've got 12 propositions. This is an activity I give to students, and I ask them to divide these propositions into those which are logically certain, psychologically certain, and those that cannot be doubted. In this next slide, you have the activity completed by myself. First thing to notice is that those logical certainties, I've also called them absolute truths, which means they are 100% philosophically certain. And I've also said that these are analytic a priori propositions. On the right hand side, you've got the psychological certainties, which are contingently true, which means they are contingent or depend on the evidence for their validity. And I've also termed these synthetic a posteriori propositions. You'll also see that there is some debate over whether those propositions 6, 7 and 12 are psychological certainties, or possibly some people would say logical certainties. Now we've got necessary truths or logical certainties contrasted with contingent truths. For example, necessary truths, a bachelor is an unmarried man and 2 + 2 = 4. These come from logic and mathematics. When these are described as a priori analytic, this is a term that comes from Immanuel Kant. Analytic means it regards ideas alone. Hume, in fact, called these relations of ideas, which I think goes some way to explain exactly what they are. And a priori means that these propositions can be justified prior to sense experience. The main quality of these propositions is that they are certain. On the right hand side, you've got contingent truths. Now these truths are not logically or philosophically certain. For example, it's very possible that my front door is now blue and not green. And it's also possible, even though it is highly unlikely, that the sun will not rise tomorrow. The main evidence that I do think the sun will rise tomorrow is because it has done ever since the Earth has been spinning, which is what, about 4 billion years. If we now compare these two types of propositions, the major advantage of the analytic a priori is that they are certain and permanent. The big disadvantage is it's questionable whether the analytic a priori really provides us with useful knowledge. On the other hand, synthetic a posteriori propositions are definitely useful. Just look at the areas of knowledge, the natural sciences and the human sciences. However, these propositions are definitely not certain. Bring us now to the possibility of the synthetic a priori. First, we've got here the analytic a priori. Next, you've got the synthetic a posteriori. The question is, can we have synthetic propositions, that means about the world outside of your mind, in other words the physical world, that can be justified prior to sense experience? If these propositions are possible, it would mean that we can have absolutely logical, certain knowledge about the world outside of our mind. Now, the possibility of the synthetic a priori really strikes at the heart of the debate between rationalism and empiricism. Everybody agrees that there are analytic a priori propositions, maths and logic. Everybody also agrees that there are synthetic a posteriori propositions, natural and human sciences. However, rationalists believe there are synthetic a priori propositions as well. What the synthetic a priori offers rationalists is a certainty upon which they can then build a body of knowledge to give them secure and certain knowledge about the world in general. Empiricists, on the other hand, deny that the synthetic a priori is possible. Therefore, all knowledge, they argue, about the world outside of your mind is less than certain or probabilistic. The reasons why empiricists deny the possibility of the synthetic a priori are quite varied. First of all, they criticise specific arguments that rationalists use to justify the existence of these propositions, and these include criticisms of Descartes' argument for God and his cogito, which argues for the existence of the self. Secondly, they also point to the problem of illusion and the problem of induction to support their claims that these forms of propositions are simply impossible. So finally, to link back to certainty, if you are a rationalist, you can move from the logical certainty provided by analytic a priori and the synthetic a priori to truth claims, both about mathematics, logic, and indeed propositions about the world outside of your mind. If, on the other hand, you are an empiricist, the movement from certainty to truth claims is a little bit more complicated, and you really need to invoke, in this case, other TOK core concepts to justify your truth claim. So that concludes the second of two videos with regard to certainty. The first focusing on belief and psychological certainty, and this second one focusing on logical certainty and the possibility of the synthetic a priori. Those propositions termed by Kant the synthetic a priori really strike at the main difference between rationalism and empiricism. And indeed, it's very interesting to think about the consequences of those different positions in terms of knowledge, specifically of things beyond our minds, knowledge of the physical world. So as always, thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe and don't forget to smash the like button.